Good morning, everyone. So, some students are yet to come, even some colleagues. Hopefully they will come. Last night was a probably shorter night for some of us. But nevertheless, the session is transmitted. It's live. So we already know that some are watching it online. So this morning we are happy to be again here for the second and the last session that we have this morning the keynote presentation, and then another plenary, and then we have the parallel sessions in E1, E2, and E3. This morning, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Trim. He's the Director of Archive, Statistics, and Research for the General Conference of Seventhday Adventists. He has a very broad experience in the work of the church in many ways. As some of you probably have read his short bio from the brochure, he was born to missionary parents in Bombay, India. He spent his childhood in Australia, and then he went back to the UK. He studied at Newbold College for a BA, and then he took his PhD from King's College, University of London. So he started teaching at Newbold College for 10 years, undergraduate history and religion, and then graduate courses in missiology and hermeneutics, and then for 2 years at PUC, Pacific Union College, where he was held actually the Walter C. Ott Chair of History. Then he was elected to the current position of the World Church at the Annual Council in 2010. He's also a historian, I think, at heart. He published several books, and he's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and also an adjunct professor of church history at the Seventhday Adventist Seminary at Andrews University. He's an author, co-author of an editor of 18 books. He has additionally published 80 scholarly articles and book chapters and another 70 articles for the general church readers. So this morning, he will present us the latest in the church, key trends in key metrics in the global church. So we want to welcome you, Dr. Trim, this morning. So the presentation will be like 1 hour full with questions there. I will show you when you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. So what I'm going to share this morning, as you'll see in the abstract in the booklet, comes from recent surveys. The surveys are carried out by the World Church as part of its strategic planning process. And what you see on the screen above is the strategic planning cycle. This would be much the same for many organizations, except that ours begins at the top. You probably can't see too clearly, but it says a biblical understanding. Most organizations would begin with the mission statement. Ours begins with a biblical understanding, and then from that flows a mission statement. But for us, of course, being Seventh-day Adventists, everything has to flow from a biblical understanding. And then the mission statement, which the church periodically tweaks, but has remained much the same. In fact, it's remained the same now for 10 years. And then after the mission statement comes data collection. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's the major part of what the Office of Archive, Statistics and Research, or ASTR, does, is data collection. That leads through to a determination of issues, and from that, a determination of goals, and then action plans to deliver goals, and then implementation. And we are in the implementation phase right now. The last strategic planning cycle finished last year in 2024 with the creation and adoption of a strategic plan for 2025 to 2030. It was adopted by annual council last October. So we're now in the implementation phase, but things do not remain static. Even as we continue to implement plans, we will be starting the cycle again with the next round of data collection, which will take place in 2027 and 2028. So the data collection was founded on several surveys, of which the largest is the Global Church Member Survey. And it's implemented around the world in different divisions, and it's implemented by different teams in each division. Here you see a photograph from the office of the Inter-American Division Implementation Team at Montemorelos University in Mexico. You can see the boxes full of returned paper surveys which had to be processed and entered into software. Here you see the office of the 3 African Division Implementation Team at the University of East Africa, Baraton in Kenya. We have one implementation team for all 3 African divisions, seeing it's one continent, and you can see that the office is almost overwhelmed. It's almost disappeared under all the boxes of surveys that have been returned. You may wonder, why are they paper surveys? In some parts of the world, the survey is implemented online. In others, it is implemented as a paper survey because of technology. But we use both methods in different parts of the world according to what is most effective there. And indeed, going back to Inter-America Division, they use a mix of paper surveys and online surveys in their territory, depending on the technological infrastructure. But Africa, almost all were paper surveys. So the 2022-2023 Global Church Member Survey is what we call Global Church Member Survey 3. There were 2 earlier ones in 2013 and 2017-18. The first had a sample size, or the N. Those of you who do research will know what that means. The N is the sample size. The N in 2013 was 26,000. The N in 2017-18 was 55,000. And then for Global Church Member Survey 3, you can see the N is 149,613. So whereas the margin of error for the 2013 survey, GCMS 1, the margin of error was plus or minus 3%. For the most recent church member survey, GCMS 3, the margin of error is plus or minus 0.4%. So this gives a great deal of confidence to the data. It's, as research specialists would say, it makes the data very powerful. But there were other surveys concluded as well. There was an institutional workers survey. This was actually conducted between 2016 and 2023 because, as it turns out, it's quite difficult to get an institutional workers survey done because there are different sectors of Adventist institutions. There's health and healthcare institutions, there's educational institutions such as this one, there's publishing institutions, there's media institutions, there's ADRA. And of course, there are all these different types of institution or different sectors, but then there's each division as well. So trying to get the necessary buy-in turned out to be extremely complex, and so this survey had to be conducted over a number of years, but it concluded in 2023. The N was 13,669 with employees from all of those institutions, types of institutions that I mentioned: healthcare, education, publishing, and media. In 2022, we conducted a global church leaders survey. That's of leaders down to the conference level, conference presidents, union and division departmental directors and officers. 3,756 was the N for the church leaders survey. And then also in 2022-23, we had the Global Pastors Survey with an N of 12,760. Now, that is actually a very significant percentage of the total number of pastors, full stop. So generally, of course, one does a survey of a sample. the pastors' survey, in effect, was a whole population survey because there are around 30,000 Adventist pastors, and so we're talking about a third of the total number of pastors. So that data is particularly powerful. To get, as those of you who have done quantitative research will know, to get 30% of your desired sample is generally regarded as good. Here we actually got 30% of the whole population of pastors. So this is the cluster of surveys on which the World Church's strategic plan is created. Now, in addition, we work closely with the Church's 13 divisions and with General Conference departmental directors. And so there's a qualitative aspect to the research as well, because we had a standardized questionnaire that we put to all the division officers and to all the General Conference departmental directors. And we looked at that data and went through that carefully as well. So the World Church's strategic plan is not something that just emerges out of a brainstorm of a few people sitting in a committee in Silver Spring, Maryland in the United States. It's based on a very deep and wide survey of all kinds of church members, both rank-and-file church members, pastors, institutional employees, and church leaders or administrators, and on deep consultation with the church in all its regions. So what is revealed by the data? What are the key 5 and 10-year trends? And that's what we're going to be looking at now. So let's start with spiritual life practices. And then we'll also look at beliefs. So spiritual life practices, I hadn't realized that the screen was going to be quite so distant from everybody sitting here. Perhaps that's a slight design flaw in this otherwise beautiful chapel. But hopefully you can just make out the numbers there, but in any case I shall interpret it for you. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Thank you. If I enlarge it too much, you can't see the whole thing. But so this shows personal prayer. And the dark blue on the right is daily or more than daily. The light blue is more than once a week. The gray is about once a week. The pink is less than once a month. And the red is never. On the bottom one, you can see the dark blue is again the daily or more than once a day. The light blue is more than once a week. The blue-gray is about once a week. But then we have a distinction between once or a few times a month and less than once a month and never. But what you can see is that there's almost no change between 2018 and 2023. In 2018, 65% of church members prayed daily or more than daily. In 2023, it was 64%. So basically, there's no change. And we're going to see that in a number of cases. And this is, I will confess, a disappointment, because the 2013 church member survey led to the church setting out some ambitious goals. And we'll see that in some cases, if we look over the 10-year trend, we can see that there was improvement by 2018, but between 2018 and 2023, very often there's been very little improvement, very little change, and it just shows the difficulties that the church has in achieving significant improvements in important metrics. The world church is very big. There's now more than 23 million reported members around the world. It's in most countries recognized by the United Nations. The church is very big, very complex, and it's hard to move the indicators. So prayer, I think this is a disappointment to many on the GC strategic planning, and I think to many world church leaders, that those who pray daily are not even 2/3. Now, if you add in the 17%, again, it's the same in both surveys, who pray more than once a week. So that's not every day, but it's several times a week. So 2 to 6 times a week, basically. If you add that 17%, it's up to 82%, but that still seems to me to be a relatively low proportion for people praying. And this, by the way, we excluded praying at meal times, because a grace at mealtime is often very perfunctory. So this is sustained prayer, and we find that not even 2/3 of church members engage in sustained prayer every day. So this seems to be a weakness in terms of spirituality. Of course, yesterday Peter Cinchala discussed spirituality, and how can we have a good relationship with the Holy Spirit or with God, full stop, if we're not praying? What about Bible reading? So here you can see, again, very little change. The dark blue is the daily, the red is the never, and that gives you the span of the time frames. 48% of church members read the Bible daily in 2018, and an extra 28% read it more than once a week. So they may not have made it every day, but they were reading it several times a week. So that together was 76%, but still less than half read the Bible daily. If we come to 2023, we can see that it's increased by 1 percentage point, and remember the margin of error is plus or minus less than 0.4%. So we can say that that increase is real, but it's so minimal as to be almost inconsequential. And you can see that the reading several times a week declined from 28% to 26%. So the several times a week in total comes to 75%. Now that's pretty good, and if we had comparable data for other churches and denominations, I suspect we would find that this is a pretty good result. But we as Seventhday Adventists think of ourselves as people of the book, isn't that right? And clearly, we're not quite as much people of the book as we'd like to think we are. This is one of those things that's going to be on a strategic plan to increase the amount of prayer and Bible reading daily, probably until Jesus comes again. Because actually, would we even be satisfied if this was 90%? I don't think so. We would want every church member to be reading the Bible daily, or at least several times a week. But you can see there hasn't been much shift here. And you can see the trend. We had surveys about Bible reading conducted in 2002 and 2007. Now, they weren't as widespread or exhaustive, and the methodologies for collecting the data were different. So they're not directly comparable, but they do give us some sense of a trend. And here there has been an improvement. And you can see that in 2002 and 2007, only 33% of Adventists read their Bible daily. And this is one of the reasons that the church introduced in 2010 its emphasis on revival and reformation. If you ever wonder why the church comes up with some of its initiatives and programs, sometimes they just come out of people's minds, it's true, but often they come out of data. And so this was why revival and reformation was introduced. And you can see it had an impact. By 2013, 42% of church members read the Bible daily. By 2018, that was up 6 percentage points to 48%. So that's a significant improvement. And so it's a little disappointing that it's only increased 1 percentage point more. But you can perhaps see why that's happened if you look at the 2 to 6 times weekly. Because you can see that from between 2013 and 2018, yes, daily Bible reading went up by 6 percentage points, but several times weekly dropped by 4 percentage points. So basically what the church achieved was to get people who were reading the Bible frequently to read it always. We weren't getting people who weren't reading the Bible at all or very infrequently to start reading it more frequently. Now, the weekly or more often, you can see, went up from 56% in 2007 to 83% in 2013. That may partly be because of the different methodologies and collection modes. But you can see it went up from 83% to 89% in 2018, but has now dropped back to 85%. So what the church needs to do is to find a way to get people who are reading their Bible infrequently to start reading it more frequently. We are exhausting perhaps the possibilities, it would seem, of getting people to read the Bible daily. And yet you can see we have even less than half of church members, almost half, but not quite even half of church members read their Bible daily. And then 3/4 who read it several times a week. And that percentage who read it 2 to 6 times weekly is falling, and that's where we're getting the improvement in the daily Bible reading. So this represents a challenge for the world church. There has been an improvement, but it's been an improvement of getting, as I say, the people who are already reading the Bible frequently to be reading it every day, rather than increasing people who have very little exposure to the Scriptures to increase it full stop. On the other hand, you can see the never or less than once a month has dropped from 11% in 2018 to 7%. So that is one positive trend. So the trend here is good, but when you investigate beneath the surface of it, it's not quite as good as it looks, and the overall result is still disappointing for people who say we're people of the book. What about the Adult Bible Study Guide, the Sabbath School Quarterly? Here you can see there's been a small improvement. Daily or more than once a day has increased from 36% in 2018 to 38% in 2023. Again, because the margin of error is so small, a 2 percentage point increase is effectively a real increase, but it's very small. And again, you see the drop from the more than once a week from 27% to 26%. So the several times a week basically has remained stable. And even if you combine the two, we're still not at even 2/3. What about reading the writings of Ellen G. White? Here we get a much smaller percentage, and you can see that there's been virtually no change between 2018 and 2023. Reading Ellen White daily was 17% in 2018, it's 17% in 2023. Reading her more than once a week, 19% in 2018, 18% in 2023. Where there has been a slight improvement is that never in 2018 was 21%, and it's down 4 percentage points in 2023. So that does look like an encouraging trend. Let's have a look at the 10-year trend, though. You can see that the daily has increased by 1 percentage point in 2018, and not at all in 2023. The multiple times a week is actually down 3 percentage points over the decade, and the once weekly is down 5 percentage points over the decade. So even though the never reading Ellen White has dropped 3 percentage points, the weekly or more often has actually declined from 56% to 49%. So there's been no improvement in the daily study of Ellen G. White, I should say, and the weekly or more often total has actually, the trend is downward. 3 percentage points in 2018, an extra 4 percentage points in 2023. So we face a real challenge when it comes to encouraging church members to read the writings of Ellen G. White. And then, how often, most of the time, do you have morning or evening worship with members of my family? Here you can see that in 2018, daily was 37%. It's dropped 4 percentage points to to 33%. So here the trend is actually negative. Rather than being static, it's actually declining. And yet, think about it, family worship is or should be fundamental as a spiritual life practice in families. Even for people who don't have children, a couple should have worship together. And here, let's look at the 10-year trend. In 2013, this was the first time we'd ever asked a question in a World Church survey about family worship, and we were concerned on the General Conference Strategic Planning Committee at how low the figures were. Now, again, we have to recognize not everybody has children, not everybody has children still living at home, so that is part of an explanation why these figures are still low, but they can't explain it entirely. And you can see the 10-year trend is disappointing. And yet in 2013, the World Church leadership said family worship needs to be a priority of the World Church. What was the impact? In 2018, there was no improvement in the daily percentage, and by 2023, it had actually gone down 4 percentage points, and the never has gone up from 2013 to 2023 by 8 percentage points. So again, this shows the limits on what the World Church can do to change spiritual life practices of its members. Now, we recognize, of course, what a quantitative survey doesn't tell you is the why. And that's where qualitative research can be more helpful. But we can speculate as to the reasons why. People are very busy. If you go back 50 years, very often an Adventist family, the wife and mother would not have been working and could have helped with planning for family worship. Nowadays, both parents or both members of a couple are usually working, and so life is very busy and it's hard to fit in worship. But nevertheless, this is a core spiritual discipline, and when we look at why so many church members leave, 43% of church members leave the church around the world, and many of them are young people, we can't look at the family worship scores being so low and say there's no association here. Why do 43% of church members leave and many of them young people? Surely part of it is that there isn't a regular family worship in many families. How often in the last 12 months have you as a church member helped with a church ministry on Sabbath? The dark blue is more than once a week, the medium blue is every week. So you need to combine the two figures that are over on the right. I'm just trying to enlarge this for you, and it's just not quite cooperating. Any rate, so you can see in 2018, 35% of church members helped with a church ministry on Sabbath every week. By 2023, that had actually gone up to 36%. So basically, there's no change. It's a 1% increase, which we could say is real given the margin of error, but it's so minor as to be inconsequential. Almost every week or more often was 50% in 2018. It's 49% in 2023, so no improvement. How often in the last 12 months have you helped with a church ministry during the week? Almost every week or more often is up from 40% in 2018 to 43% in 2023. So that's good. So note the difference. This is have you helped with a church ministry on Sabbath. This is how often have you helped with a church ministry during the week, which of course requires an extra commitment. And so we can see that the figure is down. Instead of 50% for helping with the church ministry on Sabbath. It's down at 43%, but it still has gone up since 2018. And of course, we would like to see church members being more engaged. So those are spiritual life practices. Let's now turn to some key beliefs or doctrinal beliefs. And first, we'll give you some baseline beliefs that are important, but on which Adventists pretty much have a clear consensus. Salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. 81% strongly agreed in 2018, 14% strongly agreed. You can see it's gone down. The strongly agree has gone down 2 percentage points in 2023, but the agree is up 2 percentage points. So if you combine them, it's still 95% agree and strongly agree that salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. So that's encouraging, yes? That's what we'd want to see. The true Sabbath is the seventh day, Saturday. 83% strongly agree in both years and 14% agree, so it's 97%. There's no improvement between 2018 and 2023, but that's because it would be very hard to have an improvement because you have 97% agree and strongly agree that Saturday is the true Sabbath. So that gives you a sense of beliefs that these are obviously two of the most fundamental, salvation through Christ alone, and Saturday is the true Sabbath. But you can see here what it looks like when Adventists agree with something wholeheartedly. Fundamental belief number 5, and I'm going through these in order of the fundamental beliefs. In 2018, we didn't ask a question about the Holy Spirit. In 2023, we did, and we were shocked at the result we got, because the question said, the Holy Spirit is God's power in the world, not a person. And fundamental belief 5 actually says the Holy Spirit is as much a person as God the Father and God the Son. And yet you can see 34% strongly agreed that the Holy Spirit is only God's power in the world, not a person. And 22% agreed. Only 26% strongly disagree. And you can actually see how evenly it's distributed. So more church members agreed with this statement than disagreed with it. Creation. I believe God created the universe. Now we asked 2 questions about creation, and I want you to notice the difference. I believe God created the universe. You can see that in both 2018 and 2023, the agree and strongly agree is 95%. There's been virtually no change, 1 percentage point down in the strongly agree, but effectively the same 95% agree or strongly agree, God created the universe. Now look at the next statement. I believe God created the world in 6 literal days in the relatively recent past. So this is a question about biblical creation. Note the difference. In 2018, 65% strongly agreed. It was still 65% in 2023. And again, the agree was the same, 21% in both years. So there's been no real shift there. But note how it's down. The strongly agree and agree together are down from 95% to 86%. So that's a 9 percentage point difference. But I also want you to notice the difference between the strongly agree on God created the universe, which is 80%, and the strongly agree on I believe God created the world as described in Genesis, down to 65%. So that's a 15 percentage point difference. And you can see the trend from 2013 to 2023 summarized here. Strongly agree actually was even higher in 2013. It was 72%. So there's been a 7% shift in that. But notice the agree is up from 13% to 21%. So the agree and strongly agree together are virtually the same over 10 years, but there's been a big difference in the strongly agree and agree. Now, friends, those of you who do quantitative research will know that typically, if you were to be looking at a presentation by a commercial survey company, they would always group the agree and strongly agree. And you can see I've done that a couple of times as well. But so commercial surveys would normally say agree and strongly agree, you always combine them. What we see with Adventist data is that you have to look carefully at the difference between the agree and the strongly agree. You remember I said I'm showing you these two doctrines on Christ's salvation through Christ alone and Saturday the true Sabbath, partly to give you a sense of what it looks like when Adventists agree. You get not only 95% agree and strongly agree, the strongly agree is up at the 80% or the high 70 percentile. When Adventists feel uncertainty about something that they know they should agree with, they know the church teaches this, but I don't have certainty, they don't like to express it as disagreement. So what they do is they express it as agreement rather than strong agreement. So I know Genesis teaches God created the world in 6 literal days in the relatively recent past. But I can't strongly agree with that, but I'm not going to disagree with it, so I'll choose agree instead. And we'll see this in other metrics as well. But you can see here we have a problem, that the agree and strongly agree together are effectively the same over the 10 years, but there's been a 7 percentage point decline in the strong agree. So we're beginning to see, and you can see the difference even in the combining the agree and strong agree with the I believe God created the universe. 9 percentage points difference. But it's when you look at the difference between the strong agree and agree that you can see even more we have the makings of a problem here. So Adventists are still overwhelmingly creationists, but in various parts of the world, and it's not only in Europe and North America, people are beginning to have doubts about the Genesis narrative of creation. Pardon me. I believe the remnant, the Seventhday Adventist Church, is God's true last-day church with a message to prepare the world for the second coming of Christ. Here you can see there's been no change in the 5 years between 2018 and 2023. Strongly agree is both times at 75% and agree at 18%. But let's look at the 10-year trend, and we actually asked a question about this in 2007, when we only asked them whether they agreed, not breaking it down into agreement and strong agreement. And you can see again the change between 2013 and 2023. The strong agree in 2013 was 89%. Now, in 10 years later, it's down to 75%. So that is a 14 percentage point decline. If you just look at the agree and strongly agree, you can see there's been virtually no change since 2007. It's up in the mid-90th percentile. But where you see the change is agree getting larger and strongly agree getting smaller. So on belief in the remnant church, we're also beginning to see signs of a little bit of doubt creeping in. Ellen White was a prophet. 72% in 2018 strongly agree, 70% strongly agree in 2023. Again, let's look at the 10-year trend. And this time, it's not strongly agree, it's I embrace it wholeheartedly. That's the dark blue. The light blue is I accept it because the church teaches it. Ellen White was a prophet. In 2013, we had 76% said they embrace it wholeheartedly. In 2023, it's down to 70%. So that's a 6% percentage point drop. I do not accept has also gone down, interestingly. So now there are just more people who say, I have doubts about it. So there is a slight but concerning trend. So that is saying Ellen White was a prophet. What about Ellen White's writings? This question asked people to agree Ellen White's writings are the result of the spiritual gift of prophecy. And 69% in 2018 strongly agreed, and exactly the same in 2023. So again, we're seeing very little shift. But what you're seeing again is that even though if you combine strongly and agree, you get into the 90th percentile, the strongly agree is lower than on the doctrines, for example, about the Saturday being the Sabbath, or salvation is through Christ alone, or God created the universe. So again, you're seeing weaker strong agreement and an increase in the agreement compared with some of those other core doctrines where Adventists are more certain. Does that make sense? Are you following me what I'm saying about strong agreement and agreement? Fundamental belief 22, healthy living. The health message is a core part of the Seventhday Adventist belief that cannot be questioned. You can see there's been a decline of 4 percentage points since 2018. We didn't ask this question in 2013, so I can't show the 10-year trend, but strongly agree has gone down from 46% to 42%. Now again, if you combine the agree and strongly agree, you're into the 80th percentile. But note how low the strongly agree is. And even the interesting thing is there's a paradox, because you note it's less than half, but it's still quite high, saying the health message cannot be questioned. But we also ask this question: I can choose which parts of the health message to follow and which to ignore. Now, given that 46% or 42% strongly agree that the health message cannot be questioned, to this question we should be getting 40% strongly disagree, but we're not. We're only getting 17% strongly agree in 2018 and 20% in 2023. So some of the people who say the health message is a core part that cannot be questioned, nevertheless are saying, I'm able to pick and choose which parts of the health message I want to follow. So we have a paradox there. And then here's a particularly striking result. Following the health message ensures my salvation. This is not something the church has ever taught. But you can see 23% strongly agreed in 2018 and an extra 24% agreed. So nearly half of church members globally said, yes, the health message, following it ensures my salvation. That's down slightly to 45% in 2023, but we're still talking almost half of church members saying that the health message is necessary to ensure my salvation. Health is about improving our bodies and minds in the present day and enabling us to understand the Bible more clearly and also to work more effectively for God. It has nothing to do with our salvation. Now, there are considerable geographical varieties on this result. It's more typical of Africa and Asia that people agree. In Europe and North America, people very strongly disagree with this. The sanctuary. Well, now we asked 2 questions about the sanctuary. The first was this: the sanctuary doctrine is vital to Adventist theology. And you can see 58% of church members in 2023 strongly agree. And if you combine strongly agree and agree, it's up to 87%. But then, so that was saying the sanctuary doctrine is vital to Adventist theology. But then we asked a different question. Christ is acting as our advocate before God in the heavenly sanctuary right now. Here you can see you get a much higher strong agree, and the strongly agree and agree together is in the 90th percentile. And there's a slight difference between 2018 and 2023, but effectively, for both, you've got in the 90th percentile. So, people are not so certain that the sanctuary doctrine is vital to Adventist theology, but people are certain that Christ is acting as our advocate before God in the heavenly sanctuary right now. And we asked a third question. The investigative pre-Advent judgment began in 1844. Here again, it's not agree strongly, it's I embrace it wholeheartedly or I embrace it because the church teaches it. You can see that in both 2018 and 2023, 65% say I embrace wholeheartedly, 19% say I accept it because the church teaches it, which of course is a much lower form of agreement. Let's look at the 10-year trend. This actually is a positive trend because in 2013, embrace wholeheartedly was 61%. That's gone up 4 percentage points to 2023. And I don't accept it or I have major doubts about it has gone down from 10 percentage points in 2013 to 7% in 2023. So there is a positive trend here, but note the difference between belief that Christ is acting in the heavenly sanctuary now and that the investigative judgment began in 1844. But there are two parts to the sanctuary doctrine. And we, church members, overwhelmingly accept one part, that Christ is acting in the heavenly sanctuary now, and Adventists are much less certain about the other part, which is the investigative judgment. The church's interpretation of end-time prophecies, 65% strongly agree, 22% agree, so it's still in the high 80 percentile. Now let's talk about the state of the dead. In 2013, we got some alarming results, and so we started to ask more questions. In fact, in 2013, I can remember presenting the data to annual council and afterwards having several union presidents come up to me and saying, no, this can't be right, you're misunderstanding it. So in 2018 and 2023, we asked several questions about the state of the dead to get a clearer insight. So here is the first question we asked. When people die, their bodily remains decay, and they have no consciousness or activity until they are resurrected. You can see 72% strongly agree in 2023. If you add the agree, it's up into the 90th percentile. And just to show you the 10-year trend, though it's dropped on the strong agree from 79% in 2013 to 72% in 2023, and you can see the agree was low and has gone up. So the agree total has actually gone up by 5 percentage points, but the strongly agree has gone down by 7 percentage points. But still, we're looking at 92% saying they agree or strongly agree with this statement. This statement is what the church teaches. This is what people will have learned in baptismal class, so people know what the answer should be and they give the right answer. But then we asked a separate question. The soul is a separate spiritual part of a person and lives on after death. 33% of church members worldwide agree or strongly agree with this. Now, how can they agree with both of these things? Because the first one is bodily remains decay and there's no consciousness or activity until they're resurrected, but their soul is separate and the soul continues. So, 1 in 3 Adventists around the world agree or strongly agree, and in a couple of divisions it's more than 50%. So we have a major problem with our understanding of the state of the dead. There are more questions more data points I could share on about the state of the dead. For example, but I'm not going to give all of them for reasons of time, but just for example, people who have died believing in Christ are in heaven right now. 1 in 5 Adventists agree worldwide. The dead, I will go through all these. The dead have powers to communicate with and influence the living. 1 in 7 agree or strongly agree. So the answers to the questions about the state of the dead and evil powers show that whatever church members may say about the state of the body after death, many of them believe that the soul continues and that the dead are able to affect the living. This is particularly true in Africa and Asia. In Europe and North America, Adventists are much clearer on what the church teaches about the state of the dead. So in Africa and Asia, there's a particular problem, but there is no part of the world where there is not a significant percentage that believe the soul continues after death. I would say there is a positive side to some of these findings. We are having these problems because we're growing, and in particular, we're growing among non-Christian people. But there is more work that needs to be done in discipling those who have been baptized. Now, to conclude this presentation, I'm going to share some data from the pastoral survey, because I know a number of you are students here studying pastoral theology or teaching it, and a number of you have been pastors who are even now in academia. We last did a pastoral survey in 2013. We didn't do one in 2018. I know that God called me to be a pastor. 90% strongly agreed in 2013. It's down 6 percentage points to 2023. But it's still 84% strongly agree. So that's a positive result. I feel supported by my congregation. In 2013, 39% strongly agreed, 7% disagreed or strongly disagreed. But in 2023, 49% say they strongly agree. I feel supported by my congregation. So that is up by 10 percentage points. And those who disagree or strongly disagree have gone up slightly. But so 10 percentage points more feel strongly supported by their congregation. Pastoral ministry, I feel strongly supported by my conference leaders as opposed to the congregation. Again, a significant increase. 39% strongly agreed in 2013, 48% strongly agreed in 2023, so up by 9 percentage points. So friends, that gives you a sense of where the world church is at. Yesterday I talked about how the first duty of a leader is to define reality. This is our reality. It's not exactly what the church would want in every respect. And there's still a lot of work that we have to do to improve things like getting our church members to pray and read the Bible, to read the writings of Ellen White, to study their Sabbath school guide. And we have a lot of work to do in the area of the sanctuary and biblical creation, and in particular, the state of the dead. But there are a number of things that are going well for the church and a number of things that are improving. So continue to watch this space, and maybe in 5 years I will come back and share with you the results of the data from 2028. Thank you.
So we kept a couple of minutes for Q&A, questions and answers. So any questions? Yes, Andre? The mic, please. Yes, okay. So apparently it's gone. Okay.
All right. So we did ask in 2022 and 2023, we did ask questions about the pandemic. We asked questions about, had the church moved online? Were they able to pay tithe and give offerings? Did they adopt ministries online? So we asked a cluster of questions about the pandemic. And we got some very interesting results from that. Obviously, there was some discrepancy around the world, partly based on technology, but everywhere around the world, churches, a lot of them moved online. Though in some parts of the world, churches were able to continue meeting in person to a much greater degree because there were different legal constraints. How the pandemic affected the other questions about spiritual life practices and beliefs, we don't have a sense of that. And indeed, what I've shown you is that in many cases there was virtually no change between 2018 and 2023. There were more changes between 2013 and 2018 than there were between 2018 and 2023. Why that was the case, we don't know. So whether that was the influence of the pandemic, it doesn't seem likely, but where we saw interesting answers about the pandemic were the questions on what were the effect of the pandemic on you and your local church.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, in the back, please. Yes. So how can?
Your institutions.
Okay. Yes. So the role of institutions.
Yeah. So actually in Africa, even though the team that gathered the data was at one university, we did use other universities as well to implement the data. There were people involved from Adventist University of Africa, for example. So, but that is really just in implementing the data and then doing an analysis of that division for the world church. Because we asked the implementation team in each division to do an analysis of that division because they're closest to the data and can give the best interpretation. And then that goes to the division leadership and to the General Conference Strategic Planning Committee. I think more interesting to me would be is if people in institutions would get involved in analyzing the data. Because we now have 3 surveys. Remember, 26,000, 55,000 and 150,000 in the samples. We have 3 extraordinary data sets. Very rich data. People could write PhD dissertations or theses just from the survey data that we have. And it's a frustration to me that more Adventist scholars aren't getting involved and looking at the data and digging deep into it and saying, what is this showing? So what I would like to see is Adventist scholars at our institutions engaging with the data set and doing data mining and saying, here's a very interesting result. Perhaps take my division, if maybe I'm from East Central Africa division, I'll look in depth at the details and maybe I'll compare it to other African divisions or other parts of the world. There's no end of possibilities for what could be done. If you want to do that kind of data mining and engage with the data sets, then please talk to me. We'd love to hear from you and we can arrange for you to have remote access to the data sets.
Thank you very much. Our time for this section is done. But still, David Trim will be with us throughout this day, tomorrow also. So feel free to approach him and ask him questions. He will be also presenting tomorrow. He will be having the sermon. But for now, it's our pleasure to offer you this certificate of participation.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here and presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.